if they're like getting on. At the beginning, I'd like to ask people to be sure to mute your mics when you're not speaking, because there is some feedback issues we occasionally get. And then use the raise your hand icon, if you would, to if you want to say, so we don't have too much overtalk. Okay, I have an alphabetical list of participants here, so I think I'll just go through that. As easier than trying to figure out. So, Allison, you were number one. Unmute, Allison.
So I'm Allison, and I'm the Office Specialist 2 for Community Development.
Barbara?
I'm coming. My thing takes a long time. There's such a delay when I click. I'm sorry. I'm Barbara McLaughlin. I'm the North County rep for the Housing Commission.
Bill?
Bill Bartline, retired county commissioner with a deep affection for the Housing Commission.
Cami?
Cami Optemauer, Executive Director of Habitat for Humanity.
Commissioner Scar?
Commissioner Erin Scar, and I am the liaison to the Housing Commission.
Gail?
I'm Gail Uzel, and I'm the South County rep, and I also chair the Outreach Committee and the Development Code Subcommittee.
Jeff? I don't have a last name. Jeff is a guest.
Sorry, guys. I had to find my unmute. I'm Jeff Wong. I'm the owner of CS Fishery and anxiously trying to develop some affordable housing for my employees and others in the area.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Michelle?
Hi, Michelle Yank, Director of Community Wellbeing at Adventist Health Tillamook and Coordinator for Tillamook County Wellness.
John Main?
John Main, retired builder in Tillamook for 40 years, member of the Housing Commission.
Chris?
Hey, good morning. I'm Chris Lockenmeyer, and I'm a major employer representative.
Okay, Kristen?
I'm Kristen Koptiuk. I'm at-large representative based in Rockaway.
Peter?
Peter Starkey, Executive Director of CARE.
Thank you, Peter. Sarah?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sarah Absher. I'm the Director of Community Development.
Shannon?
Good morning, everyone. Shannon Wakeman. I am from the Tillamook County Transportation District and a Chamber of Commerce board member.
Okay, Terry?
I'm Terry Cooper. I'm the Director of the Economic Development Council in Tillamook County.
Todd? Todd Johnston? Okay. Trevor?
Good morning. Trevor Belts. I'm Government Relations with the Tillamook Creamery, and I serve on the Legislative Subcommittee for the Housing Commission.
Thank you, Trevor. Let's see. Damien? I have people on chat. I don't know if they want to, I guess they...
I don't think those people are actually with us, Ed. I think that at some point in time they have been in a meeting. So I think
okay.
If they don't have a little microphone over there, I don't think they're actually with us today.
Okay.
Hi, guys.
As we get more popular, I'm going to allocate more than 10 minutes to introductions. This is great.
Todd Johnson. I hung up by accident. I'm working in workforce housing development and working with Habitat for Humanity in Tillamook and also with some of the local businesses.
Great. Thank you, Todd. Okay, so Mission Minute. I was hoping Tom would be on. One of the Mission Minutes was the approval of the Fanjoy project in Nehalem by the Planning Commission. Does somebody want to describe that real quickly?
I'm on, and Erin, can you hear me?
Yes.
Erin should describe it because I want to congratulate her because, quite frankly, I think that her voice when she volunteered, I think helped that push a few commissioners over the top. So let Aaron explain.
Well, I'll be happy to talk briefly, but Barbara was also there and spoke, and Kristen, I know, was there. There were quite a few members of the Housing Commission that were at that Planning Commission meeting, and I think that was a great showing. I think it was an important part of having that Planning Commission understand that, boy, there's a lot of support for this both in the community and others in the housing realm. So I will quickly just say that I thought it was the best example of how I wish planning could always work. So with the project that Jim Fanjoy brought forward, it was commercial on the bottom with residential on the top, and it required a couple of variances. They wanted to cover the lot with housing and use street side parking, so there was a variance required for that street parking. They also wanted to put accessible unit on the bottom floor, so that would be ADA accessible unit on the bottom floor, and the code said all your units needed to be, I believe, on the top, and they couldn't face a street, and this accessible unit was facing a street in Nehalem, albeit a street that is not particularly developed at this point and is not part of the real commercial frontage. So the Planning Commission had to dig through and decide, did this building, was it a unique situation that would allow them these variances? And the planning person that they had was, explained that it did not meet the codes and all of the things that you normally expect planning people to do, which is their job. And then the community came forward with such overwhelming support for the project in so many ways that I think I kind of just circled back and said, this is, amazing for lots of housing reasons. And I said, I think that is unique because, and Jim Fanjoy had laid out a perfect argument of why it was unique. And the Planning Commission ultimately approved it as submitted, found that the situation was unique, did allow the street parking, did allow the accessible unit to face a street. So it was fabulous. It was an opportunity for a Planning Commission to say, we've had enough legal stuff laid out that we can stand on, and we've had enough strong community support shown that we know we're doing the right thing for our community, which is that little piece that you get to do in planning where you can say it's the right thing for us. So it was super exciting, and I know for Nehalem, huge. So I would open up to anyone else who was at that meeting that wants to say a couple words, because I was one voice among many.
Barbara?
Yeah, I would like to add to that. Yes, it was a fabulous project, and I was very glad to see that, as Aaron said, the Planning Commission found their way to finding reasons why they could accept it. And in addition, the tone of that meeting was so positive. I mean, there was dissent, there was disagreement, and the way that everybody spoke, and particularly Jim Fanjoy and the planner, which was his first meeting, everybody complimented each other, and Jim laid out his arguments really succinctly, and there was no tone of there's an enemy in the room, and it was such a relief, not only that the project was passed, but that it felt like it was a cooperative, collaborative, real community effort, and I was just overjoyed from that aspect as well.
Sarah?
Thank you, Ed. Good morning, everyone, again. So I am pleased and very excited to share that we have a conditionally accepted offer for a new housing coordinator. So I know. So we're so thank you, Ed, for being part of that interview team with me. And if all goes well, and if we continue on this trajectory, this person will be joining us October 4th, which means they'll be here for our October Housing Commission meeting. And I'm very excited for all of you to meet this candidate. I think it's going to be a great fit and exactly what the Housing Commission needs.
He's a grad student. He was working PhD, which is English. That was about half of they work.
Ed, your voice is not coming through.
Can you hear me now okay?
I think someone else may be unmuted. Can everyone check and see if you're muted? I'm hearing shuffling of papers, which is drowning out Ed's voice. Thank you.
Can you hear me now okay? Okay. Yeah, well, anyway, I pointed out that the fellow that we hired is a grad student and finishing up and working on a PhD, actually. And he lives about a half a block from where I worked my degrees at University of Oregon, so on the same street. So it's an interesting little quirk of situation. Okay, any other mission minutes? Sarah, anything on the project in Pacific City you want to mention?
So thank you, Ed. I have been in contact with Kevin Schluka to talk about the Kingfisher Apartments, and the final appeal period ended last night at midnight. And so, well, I know, right? I'm waiting because he was supposed to email me this morning to let me know if an appeal had been filed by midnight, and my guess is he was waiting for their business office to open. So I haven't heard anything yet, which I'm going to say no news is good news, but hopefully he'll email me over the course of our in our meeting today, and then I'll share that confirmation when I get it.
Commissioner Scar, you had something additional?
Yeah, I don't think we knew this at the last meeting, but the Green Light development, Green Light / Home Forward development, which is 46 units, I believe, here in Tillamook. I think last time we met was just below the funding line for Oregon Housing Community Services, and what we did learn this month is that additional money was appropriated, and those 46 units that are going to be next to the Catholic Church will go forward. So I had an opportunity to visit with those folks this last week, and it's super exciting. So hopefully they will be breaking ground, I believe, in the fall if all goes according to plan. I might have the date wrong, but they are approved with their funding and excited to get started. So
we're getting close to our annual target of new units. That's pretty amazing. Okay, any other quickly? We'll go on. I didn't see Tim Borman on for an update on the Northwest Housing Authority, so unless Tim says something immediately, we'll go on. Hey, Gail?
Tim's here. So Ed,
okay.
I don't know if you can click on there's little people at the, so in the menu bar at the top, there's what looks like two little people. If you click on that, it'll open your participant list on the right-hand side, and that allows you to see everyone who's here. It also allows you to see who has raised hands very easily, because it puts them at the top.
Tim, raise your hand. Okay, go on. Tim, you're on.
Hi, sorry for getting in late. Nothing new to add at this point, though. Thanks for noticing me.
Okay, Gail, do you want to give an update on the Development Code Group?
Yeah, first I have to find my mouse and click unmute. Sorry. Yeah, I don't have too much to report on the development code. We meet on the first Mondays, and that hasn't happened in this month yet, so we're a step behind. I did turn up something in the course of the last month, which is that AARP has grants for various things. Needless to say, all related to people 50 and older, 55 and older. But that is something that we might investigate further. And on that note, I wanted to open up a discussion that we think that we need a committee, a subcommittee to pursue grants, to write grants and pursue looking at what monies might be out there that would be available to us. The AARP grant period closed in April, so that's done for this year, but certainly there'll be monies available again next year. And looking through their projects, it looked like some of the things that they had given substantial amounts of money to were in the ballpark of what we try to cover. So we will be looking for a stampede of people to volunteer to join that committee. And if anybody's interested, you could certainly speak up now or get to us later, or we'll hunt you down. I also want to say that for anybody who's interested, AARP also has a couple of publications on accessory dwelling units. One of them is an older publication, a couple of years older, and I have hard copies of it. They sent me a whole box of them, 100, I think, that we'll be using when we get to ADUs in the community. It's a really good primer on what is an ADU and how they fit into communities, and 10,000 reasons why it's a good idea. It's a really well-written document with concise text, lots of good photographs, and you can look at it online on the AARP site. AARP also has another publication, kind of a partner to that, that is a model accessory dwelling unit code publication, both for states and for local municipalities. And it has some very interesting discussion in it. They have updated that document since it was first published and changed some of their recommendations. And they have some pretty interesting discussions on why they changed the recommendations for particular bits of the model code, like parking requirements and owner occupancy and things like that. Just for the record, their stance is basically that ADUs should be normalized and that anything that is permissible for any other dwelling should be permissible for ADUs. And ADUs, they think that ADUs shouldn't have any regulations laid on them that aren't also laid on other dwellings, which raises questions about short-term rentals, about the recommendations for short-term rentals. So it's just an interesting discussion in there, and I encourage you all to look at that online. One more little thing is that having had that great conversation that we had with Umpqua Bank, we've circled back around to thinking about the problem with zombie houses, particularly in Tillamook, and want to check back in with the bank and get some feedback. Banks, I should say. We've only spoken to Umpqua so far, but expect to speak to more banks in the future. Get some feedback from the banks on what they think might be a tipping point to get investors who own those banks to clean them up. What the leverage might be from a investor's point of view, from a bank's point of view. So I think that's all I've got, unless Ed, have you got anything to add?
I would only say that our new housing coordinator has pretty extensive grant writing experience.
Yes.
So a committee could work with that person, and a lot of the more heavy lifting of writing these documents, that person could do. So that's a real plus. Okay, I didn't have anything else. Any questions of Gail? Okay, well, we'll go on to the, let's see, Carrie's not here. Does anybody on the legislative committee have any comments or anything? Okay. Gail, again, the outreach group.
Okay, I've put on a different hat here. The outreach committee has been busy as usual. We have lots of exciting stuff. Our webpage is seconds from being perfected. And many thanks to Allison and Jeff from the county for working with us on that. There have been so many details to work out and so many little particulars of how we want it to look and what information that we've had. Kristen and Barbara both spent a lot of time back and forthing, trying to get it all looking good, and it is looking really good. We have an address now so that people who want to contact the Housing Commission, have comments about our upcoming press releases, the What's the Story with Housing series, will be able to actually respond to those. We'll be able to actually get their email and get back to them. And we've been test flying that this week, and it's got a few little bugs still, but it's working. It seems to be working at this point. We had been talking about getting out our first press releases, and still have a tiny bit of editing to do regarding that. I want to call out thanks to Aaron for getting us current numbers. That's been our biggest glitch in that press release, is that the numbers listed in there for area median income and for housing prices are, of course, dated from the years that the studies were done, and we needed something current, and Aaron's been working really hard trying to get us current information. Thank you very much, Aaron. Barbara sent out letters to many of the publications, giving them a heads up that we're going to be doing a series of articles. And it's been really interesting to me to see how quickly some of them have responded. And I think that some of their responses will shape what we end up sending out and will shape how we spin the particular article that we want to do at that time. We got back some great questions, for instance, from Ruralite, that will help us craft articles for them. So publications are open to this, and they're helping us get the job done. That's really exciting. We had in the works to send out a letter to the major employers in the county as part of an outreach package that will ultimately be linked to information to developers and such. In the course of working on that, we've kind of done a little pivot, and now instead of sending out a letter, we're sending and now instead of asking them to respond in a letter, we're setting up a SurveyMonkey site with information from Michelle, who talked about how many things people have to respond to, and how can we make it the most easy for these employers to respond to us. So we've summarized a survey and got it out. Kristen's got it up on a test site on SurveyMonkey. Actually, Kristen, why don't you talk a little bit that we're having with that, so that anybody who might be able to help us with that can do that. Do you want to do that?
Sure.
Thank you.
The SurveyMonkey has certain limitations for the free account. So we wanted to ask if anybody has access to a paid SurveyMonkey account that we could use to go beyond the limits of the free scheme. The free system is limited to 10 questions, and even a comment section pushes you into the paid requirements. So that could be the most valuable thing for us, is to have the comments about what individual companies actually have done about housing and what they are particularly facing. So we can't figure out how to do it without that. So we're wondering if anybody already has an account that we could piggyback on to send out the survey.
Kristen, do you have an idea of how expensive an account is?
I did look it up. and I've forgotten. It's a. Does anybody know? I forget.
So, Peter, are you still with us? I know CARE used to have an account. I'm not sure if it's still active. So if Peter's listening, he can maybe answer that question for us. The other thing is that you can do it monthly. So it's like $15 a month or something along those lines, or you can do it annually. So it's one of those things that perhaps, you know, if nobody has one, this is a time limited survey, I presume, that we're doing. Maybe we can find a way to do it just on a short term, you know, making it paid for the 2 or 3 months that's needed without it being excessively expensive. So those are my 2 thoughts.
I heard my name, but I was doing something else.
I thought you might be. Peter, do you know if CARE still has an active SurveyMonkey account? We had one in the past. I'm not sure if it's still active.
I believe we do. I can look into it.
Because we need it for the work of the Housing Commission to do the survey for employers. They need a paid account to access the higher level features. So if CARE has one, can you then connect with Kristen and let her know that? That would be fabulous, and figure out how to take the work she's done and move it into that.
Absolutely. That's an easy question to answer.
Thank you.
Thank you. That would be great.
Kristen, I have a quick question. Using the SurveyMonkey account, how would you memorialize the responses that then could be used for outreach purposes to show the need for workforce housing?
How would we memorialize them?
Well, if it comes back on a survey as opposed to a letter that you could attach or make a copy of, how would you display that information?
Well, we could integrate it into some of our PR publicity send-outs, and
I will say the paid version of SurveyMonkey gives you some analysis of what comes back, so you can see it in graphs or tables or some different pieces. So I think, Ed, there may be an ability to actually create some graphics out of SurveyMonkey that would show a little bit more of what the answers were from, large employers, this many housing units, whatever the questions are. So I think there's some options there, but at the very least, you can get an Excel table, which you can turn into all those things yourself. So the paid version gives you some good data access and analysis.
And it gives us a quantitative basis as well as the qualitative. Like, we'll get responses to specific multiple choice kind of questions as well as comments. Whereas in the letter, we'll just get comments. It will be much more difficult to tabulate and to figure out how to make them all comparable. So this would be more effective, I think.
I think it's important to actually know the names of the people too, because I think that'll be a strong response. Barbara, did you have something?
Well, I was just going to ask if we can make our own copies. I appreciate your comment, Ed, that we'd like to have, something official to show, and if we can create that ourselves, by employer so-and-so from such and such, establishment says this. I think that would be really crucial, and as long as we can do that, and sounds like we can. That was where I was going.
The survey
does. My concern.
The survey does ask for the employer name and for permission to use their statements in further documents.
Great. Gail, more?
Yes, more. Another arm of what we're doing is developing a logo for the Housing Commission. We've been working a lot on that with a graphic designer. Michelle, are you there?
I am here.
Great. So Michelle's gonna do a presentation on that, tell you where we are, and let you all have a preliminary look. Thanks, Michelle.
Yeah, thank you. So we've been working with Hannah Javity. Some of you might know Dr. Javity, a local dentist. It's one of his kids, and she is in college studying graphic design. And so this is a really great hands-on opportunity for her to build her portfolio and support the work that's happening around housing in the community. I think it's been a great experience for both of us, both our committee and for her, to work on this project together. And we're just really excited about her artistic sensibility and what she's put together. So we've shared that with some focus groups within this committee, this commission. And we're kind of at a point where we've got just a few little final finishing touches to put on it before it goes prime time. So some of the feedback that we have, this is the logo representation, and it comes in multiple color options, but we'll just look at this one here. We've had one request to make this a larger font, which I think is a very doable ask. So we'll probably be putting that into our final recommendation for changes. We've also made a decision to add a little bit of a pitch to this apartment dwelling roof. Just to give a little bit of the background on some of the design elements here, we wanted to emphasize housing and the fact that it takes a community to solve the housing puzzle. And we wanted to acknowledge our role in it, but we wanted to minimize that relative to the others. So that's why there is a little bit of a design rationale for that. And then we wanted to really emphasize workforce and diverse housing and multiple solutions to this complex problem. So we came up with a design that had a single family dwelling unit, a multi-family like a duplex, an apartment complex, and a single family dwelling with an ADU. And these aren't perfectly representative of everything in the community, obviously. But we really wanted to keep a simple graphic that kind of made a statement about the diversity of approaches that are going to be required, honestly, to solve this challenge. So we hope that everyone feels good about this. And I guess today's presentation is there something that you can't live with is probably it. I'll share too that there are some individual design elements that'll get updated with those changes that can be used in different ways, like on the website or on Facebook. This is a cute little graphic that she put together for us. Again, we'll have a little pitch on this roof. We'll get this sky. They'll have this matching transom window here. We'll have an option to have this graphic with Tillamook County Housing Commission printed along the bottom. It'll probably be a Facebook banner. And I think this was an example of how we can use this in letterhead. So we'll have a letterhead template that we can use that is pre-populated with that. And it's wonderful that we now may hopefully have a housing commission coordinator, because some of the elements of all of this really hinge upon having somebody that has some staff capacity and administrative access to do some of these things, to facilitate the work of the outreach committee, because we can build the tools, but some of the dissemination is going to have to come from the planning department's office. So this is exciting because we were kind of like, well, we can do this, but we can't do that. So we want to do a comprehensive communications campaign where we create something, an article, it goes out to all of the media publications, but it also gets uploaded to the website, on the county website, on our Housing Commission page, and that link can get dropped into Facebook. So it's coming at people from multiple angles, and the likelihood of them getting getting snippets and starting conversations in different sectors of the community is greater if we can do that kind of a comprehensive approach. And so we'll be working closely with the new housing coordinator to make that happen. I think that's all that I have. I just lost everybody completely now. I keep hitting the wrong button, so I hope everybody. Anyway, any questions for me?
I just would comment that it's a great effort and much appreciated. I think we really needed that, and I like the message.
Yeah, I guess I should ask any feedback, anything that people are just like they either love or they hate, or with the changes that I noted, are people feeling good about it and feeling like it's a good representation? Sarah's got her hand up.
Thank you, Michelle. So I just have to say I'm a huge fan of this work. I think Hannah has done an incredible job, and you guys have all done a stellar job of putting these communication and public outreach pieces together. This was a big piece of the conversation during the interviews, understanding that this is one of the most critical steps and one of the greatest needs of the Housing Commission right now. So yes, the person, actually all of the candidates that were interviewed, this was a big piece of it, and you will have that skill set coming your way to take all of this, wrap it up, and bring it to the finish line with you. So that will be able to happen. So yes, keep up the good work, and I'm so excited to connect you guys with our coordinator and have these great conversations to start wrapping all of these projects up.
Wonderful, thank you.
My screen has become different, and it has a little time delay on it. So I turn my head, and then my head turns later, you know? So
It
I don't
looks
know
like
what button
Bill-
to push, but
It looks like Bill may be inadvertently sharing his screen. So Bill, can you see if you're sharing your screen and perhaps not do that? And then it looks like Tom has his hand up. I don't know if you can see that, Ed.
Yeah, one of the things I really like the clean crispness of the logo without getting busy. One question I do have is there doesn't appear, and maybe it's not necessary, to be anything to really identify Tillamook County. I mean, there's the words Tillamook County, but I wonder if there was ever a thought about somehow small incorporating the county logo, or something that just looking at the logo, it doesn't identify with Tillamook County other than the words. And I don't know that's, I think maybe as I'm saying this, I'm hearing that it'd be too busy if we tried to do something. But
I can jump in and answer that. And
Here we go.
We talked about it, and to be honest, we want to separate ourselves from anything governmenty. It was an intentional, we didn't even have Tillamook County Housing Commission on it at first, because we really want this to be super accessible. And one of the challenges is if anyone has even the slightest inclination against something, they won't even take in the information without having those filters and barriers in place. So presenting something that seems as neutral and open access as possible to start the conversation. And then they can go, we're going to have links to the county website and to the County Housing Commission stuff online. They can do their deep dive and get into all of the history about what we've been doing and all of, interests them. But starting with that open access point is super, super important.
makes sense.
And I would say a bit to add to that too, which is that the website that we're working toward, ultimately, we hope will be much like Tillamook County Wellness's website, which is to say it doesn't appear only as a subset of the county website, but it ultimately redirects you to a much more interesting and engaging and less governmental looking website. So that was one of the reasons that we made the decision on the logo, if that helps.
Okay, Gail, any more?
I don't have any more. Are there any more questions about the logo or any of the other things that we talked about? Okay, thank you all. And thanks for everybody who's helped and networked and provided us with information and encouragement and criticism and everything on this. This is a great team. It really is, all of you. Appreciate it.
Well, drum roll, Sarah, you want to talk about ADUs?
Yes, thank you. I would love to, Ed. So I am going to turn my camera off and try to share my screen, just so everybody can see the draft, and I say draft with heavy emphasis, of the ADU ordinance that we have been discussing off and on for several years, and then with the Housing Commission as well. So the ADU ordinance is the final third objective that surfaced from the Housing Summit in 2019. And so what's exciting, can everybody see my screen? Or can somebody shake their head yes that they see my screen with the ADU? Thank you, Ed. Okay. So,
can you make it bigger?
The wording bigger?
Yeah.
Yes, I can. How about that? Does that work, Gail? Oh.
Even a little bigger probably would help.
Okay. How's that?
Looks good to me.
Okay. So that fully fits my frame. So if I can make it bigger, but then I'm afraid some of the words will disappear. So yes, so this is that third and final objective that came as a priority out of the Housing Summit in 2019 that the Housing Commission has continued to discuss. And this is something that's been on the work plan for the Development Code Subcommittee. Couple of things first. So the ask today, or perhaps maybe at the following meeting, if the Housing Commission feels that's appropriate, would be whether or not you would like me to move this forward to request a workshop with the county commissioners so that I can request authorization to begin what is called a legislative text amendment process. So to add this program into our land use ordinance, what I have to do is I have to go through an amendment process to essentially update our land use ordinance, which will require public hearings and a lot of community engagement, so that we can actually adopt this program into our land use planning program. This ordinance, to also provide some clarification, would only apply within unincorporated communities within Tillamook County. So if you've had a chance to look at this draft document prior to the meeting today, then you know that unfortunately this isn't something that's allowed in a farm zone or a forest zone or an industrial zone by right. The rural residential zone is something, as you know, we are working on under a different legislative path. And so I have excluded that zone from this specific section because I will have to draft language for the rural residential zone ADUs that is consistent with and matches the language that was recently passed through legislation. And there are some nuances between how an ADU could be permitted in the rural residential zone, and certainly less flexibility than what we could ultimately consider and achieve in an unincorporated community. I have not brought this back to the unincorporated communities for several years, and I do have a CAC chair meeting next week, next Tuesday. And so largely also the outcome of the discussion today, what I will do is start sharing this again with the CAC chairs so that we can start those next steps of also making sure our communities are engaged in the public review process, which is actually a requirement through our statewide planning program. So the purpose and intent, this is a continued draft and evolution of the ADU ordinance that Gail and I actually worked on from 2009 through 2011. And so essentially the first part of it talks about the purpose and intent. And really what we're looking at is we're looking at a way to achieve our goal of providing a housing option that's accessible within our unincorporated communities. To be upfront, if you did look at this also, you also have seen the language in the draft ordinance that if there is an ADU on a property, that neither the ADU nor the primary dwelling could be used as a short-term rental. And there's a restrictive covenant component within this program as well that would commit the dwellings on a property to not be allowed to be used as a short-term rental or any type of transient lodging. So that would mean something like a bed and breakfast. So as with all good ordinance language, we want to make sure we have some definitions. And again, going through the applicability. So as proposed, should the Housing Commission agree that essentially an ADU could be placed on any property in a zone within an unincorporated community. So it would be allowed outright with standards, and we'll walk through those in a minute. And so there are some exceptions to that, and that's what's in the applicability. So the F1, the F, the SFW 20, those are all of your resource zones. These are all of your rural unincorporated areas or park and recreation management zones where in general residential uses typically are not allowed, or they're only allowed under special circumstances.
Hey, Sarah, this is Tammy. Can I ask a
Yes.
question real quick?
Sure.
Hey, just back to the not allowing like short-term rentals. I'm assuming you're also meaning like not being able to do Airbnbs and things like that.
That is correct, because to do Airbnb, you have to have a short-term rental permit because it's all.
So is that saying moving forward then any ADU that was built could no longer do Airbnb, or just in the places where they need the special zone? Like I'm wondering if now we're basically saying in the future any ADU that's built can never be used for a short-term rental.
So an ADU is a different type of dwelling unit that can be permitted under special circumstances. If it's a duplex or something that's allowed outright in the zone, which is not an ADU, that's a different story. So it largely, to qualify to be a short-term rental, it largely depends on how that dwelling unit was permitted and how that zoning allows for that dwelling unit. Right, so an ADU is intended to be a long-term housing option on a property that perhaps couldn't be there otherwise without the special allowance. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. So I
Okay.
just needed to clarify in my brain that we're not
Sure.
stopping ourselves from never having increased, tourism and things like that when it comes to housing. So it sounds like they would just have to already have that zoning outright permitted. This is just to increase options for people who want to do long-term rentals.
Correct, in a non-competitive way that also guarantees and ensures that we have long-term rental housing stock. Right, so this isn't, so the short-term rental, the transient lodging market can't compete for this type of housing option. We're trying to safeguard and secure this path for long-term residential use, either by way of a long-term rental, which means it's rented for a period of 30 consecutive days or greater, or it's that multi-generational family component, where you have two different generations of family living on a property. There's a lot of things that it can be, but what it cannot be is transient lodging. And there's there's a lot of other paths and avenues for that type of lodging option. But we want to safeguard this.
So
I think Tom has a question.
Sure, thank you, Ed. Yes, I cannot see anybody's hands, so if you could, appreciate your help. Tom?
I think he's coming. Tom?
That was left on by mistake, sorry.
Oh, no problem, Tom. Thank you. And thank you, Ed. If you could please let me know if people have questions, or please feel free to jump in, because like I said, I can't see hands with my screen share. So general requirements, I think this piece is very important because there's different types of structures or vehicles that don't meet building code requirements for long-term residential use. And that does include an RV. It does include a travel trailer. It's really important so that we make sure that we are consistent with building code requirements and with fire and life safety requirements, that if we are looking at an ADU, that it has to be built to code and consistent with code requirements for residential occupancy in a permanent and not a temporary or recreational way. With this structure type, one of the things that I have been working on the side with our building division team is coming up with a policy to help create a path forward for tiny home construction. So when we talk about accessory housing, which is your ADU, not being a travel trailer, not being an RV or a bus, what we need to do is make sure as we move this ordinance proposal forward is that we also have that supplemental information to use as a resource, as a guide, so people understand what other types of creative construction design could be considered, right? So not just telling people what they can't do, but we want to provide a guide and a path forward so people know what they can do. Not all tiny homes are built and created equally. Again, especially being here on the coast, susceptible to, multiple hazards, high wind load, and categories. We need to make sure as we're offering this as an option to the public that we also have that important guide to walk in step with that so they know what they can use and what could be considered to meet those code requirements as in this case, it would be a detached accessory dwelling unit. And just for clarification with 1A, when we talk about a health hardship provision, so this is something that's already built into our land use program. And what it is, you could use a mobile home or some sort of RV if you have a loved one who perhaps maybe is ill and can't live on their own, but wants some independence and some sort of way to shelter on a property where you already have a house. That is a health hardship dwelling. And so that is something that is separate and independent of this proposal. Although if you built an ADU and you had a loved one who needed a place to stay because they weren't well, then certainly the ADU could suffice for that as well. So water and sewer. One of the things that we want to make sure, if this is an option that we can incorporate into our land use planning program, we want to make sure that there are clear and objective standards, which means almost like a check the box for an ADU on a property of, is there water and sewer availability? Yes or no. That comes from your water and sewer districts, or sometimes when a community doesn't have a sewer district, Chris Keel in our office, who manages our on-site sanitation or environmental health and wastewater management division for properties. So we want to make sure that before an ADU is placed, that we have confirmation from the appropriate agencies that there is available water and sewer or sanitation for the property. Density, no more than one ADU could be allowed on a property. And then again, talked briefly about the restrictive covenant. And this also turns into not only the commitment of the use of the property, but it also serves as a buyer beware. Because what we want to make sure is we see properties turn over and exchange hands in ownership, especially with such a desirable short-term rental market or a very hot real estate market where people are wanting to divide properties, do adjustments, etc., so that they have more land that they can sell off and make a profit. We want to make sure that when folks are doing their due diligence that they've also seen this restrictive covenant so that they understand the commitment that the current or previous property owner has made in moving forward with an accessory dwelling unit on the property. And then that also then goes into here with the sale or transfer. And then additional standards. So some of this section, I would like to spend a little bit more time with the Development Code Subcommittee. And I think that that will also garner some comments and feedback from our unincorporated communities. Again, only one ADU per property would be proposed outright. An ADU can be placed on a property in several different ways. It could be a detached structure. It could be built above a garage or within a lawfully permitted accessory structure on the property, which could be a detached garage or some sort of shop where they can, again, meet building code requirements to convert a portion of that accessory structure into living space and an accessory dwelling unit.
Sarah, I
Yes.
think Gail has a quick question here.
Thank you. Yes, Gail.
Yeah, just going back to the temporary placement of mobile homes or RV for health hardship. I just wanted to say that if I remember correctly, the difference between that and an ADU is that is for a health hardship. And when that person is no longer occupying the building, the person for whom the hardship dispensation was given, then you're supposed to remove the dwelling.
Thank you. Yes, you're absolutely right. And that's also why it can be an RV or something temporary in nature because it's not intended to be long-term.
Yeah.
Thank you, Gail.
Yeah.
So again, then we get into the nuts and bolts of size. And what does this mean for size? Because an accessory dwelling unit is intended to be accessory and ancillary to the primary use of the property, which in this case is that primary residential dwelling or house. And so there's some language in here. And so this is largely what we found to be the norm of how large an ADU could be that we've seen other jurisdictions use. As you can see, there are some differences in if you are converting an existing structure or if you are building a detached structure. Self-containment, so the intent of that is to be a dwelling unit by definition that has a kitchen with cooking facilities, a bathroom, and a sleeping area. So letter D is something that I also think will be a really important component of this review process moving forward. The reality is that most of the properties within our unincorporated communities, because they were platted in the early to mid 1900s, largely before we had a land use planning program for Tillamook County, these lots do not meet minimum property size requirements. And so what that means is that if letter D for lot size, which requires that the property size requirement of the underlying zone be met, it is largely possible that this accessible type or available type of housing could not be carried out and developed on properties within our unincorporated communities, because most of our unincorporated communities have properties largely and primarily that are below the minimum property size requirement of the zone. And so this is something, again, working with the Development Code Subcommittee and getting feedback from the communities, I would like to spend a little bit more time on, because if our goal really is to offer availability of another housing option, I'll be honest and tell you that this standard needs to go.
I think Barbara has a question.
Yes, Barbara.
Yeah, so do you have a sense of what percentage of lots that you were describing don't meet minimum requirements? Is it a large proportion then, so that it essentially would negate the ability of having ADUs in unincorporated county?
Thank you, Barbara. Yes, in some communities, I would say, based on previous GIS and cartography analysis, it's 50%. I mean, it's a significant amount. When you look at areas like the village of Neskowin in the downtown area, or a lot of the lots in Neoconi, like through Connie Trail Loop and up Beulah Reed Road on the east side of Beulah, most of those lots, because they were lawfully established platted lots, you know, at the turn of the century or shortly thereafter, they're too small. They don't meet current size requirements. And, you know, part of what drives those size requirements is insurability of light and air and open space and solar energy. And so when we look at, you know, removing something like this lot size requirement, what we need to make sure is that we have other mechanisms and measures in place to preserve light and air and open space, fire accessibility. And so that's really where then we focus more on design standards and setbacks. You know, can we achieve the same thing on a smaller lot by coming up with some alternative approaches? And so my ask of the Development Code Subcommittee is that, you know, we continue to work on some of these details as I get ready to go before the board and ask for authorization, you know, if the Housing Commission feels that that is a good thing for me to do at this time, if now is the time. And these documents, the other thing I will say about land use ordinance drafts is that they are constantly evolving through the public hearing process. What you start with may not be what you end with, and that's largely influenced by the public review process. And so, you know, where we're at today and moving forward in the short term is that starting point. We have to have a jump off point. So this is the jump off point.
Michelle has
yes.
a comment.
Thank you. Yes, Michelle.
Yeah, I just was curious, do you need someone to like make a motion to that end that we remove that? Because I would be inclined to do that if that expedites that process.
So I appreciate that, Michelle. I don't think a motion is necessary for that, because that's something that I can just say, you know, it was part of the conversation and they agreed, because ultimately, you know, we have that whole legislative amendment process that's going to come out before us. And that will all be part of through the Planning Commission recommendations to the board, because it will be a series of hearings by both of our decision makers. But your feedback today on that, if the Housing Commission agrees, is greatly appreciated and very helpful. Parking.
Valerie has a question.
Yes, Val.
Sarah, how does it fit? We've run into a couple situations recently where in Garibaldi and one in Rockaway where the homeowner actually built the garage structure in such a way that you could add a second structure for what I would call probably would only be approved for what we used to call a mother-in-law unit, you know, not the full kitchen. Where would we, which obviously provides some solid housing, I know it's not ADU, where do you piggyback that or start to, you know, communicate as we teach people about alternatives? I know it's off topic, but where do you see that fitting?
Sure. So that's actually common, Val. We see that quite a bit. And where we see that in land use review and building permitting processes is, you know, people can move forward and start a construction phase by building the accessory structure without the cooking facilities. It's the cooking facilities primarily that change the designation of a structure that is an accessory structure to a dwelling unit. And so we see that often. And so in those instances, if somebody had that project started or had living space within a garage or a shop that met building code requirements, and they wanted to then go ahead and convert that into an actual accessory dwelling unit, we would work with them on, you know, making sure that they met the standards of this ADU ordinance. So for parking, water, sewer, or septic, etc. And then we would work with them on what type of necessary building inspections and structural modifications to meet code would need to be done to that structure to complete the transition into an actual ADU. And so it could happen. It just largely depends on, can they meet these standards once they've been adopted, which we're trying to make it, again, attainable, clear, and objective, to where it's a yes or no conversation at the counter. But then the other piece of that would be then helping them walk through the building code requirements to make sure that that dwelling unit met building code for whatever, you know, modifications or alterations they needed to make. But it can be a relatively simple process. It largely also depends on how that structure was initially built. Right.
And so it's included in our conversation. Thank you for that clarity. That's encouraging.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, yeah.
Sarah, this is Barbara. Can I jump in real quick?
Of course, Barbara.
Are the words mother-in-law apartment and ADU synonymous, or is there a difference? I heard you say what makes it a dwelling is the kitchen facilities, the cooking facilities.
Yeah.
So as we educate people and people talk about mother-in-law apartments, how do we respond?
Barb, you're reading my mind. Thank you. So it is really synonymous, because a dwelling unit is a dwelling unit. We can call it an apartment. We can call it a mother-in-law suite. We can call it an ADU. But again, if it's got those components of some sort of self-contained space that has cooking facilities, which technically is also a microwave and a hot plate. But if it has those cooking facilities, it has a bathroom and a sleeping area, then it checks all three of those boxes. You can call it what you want, but ultimately they're all one and the same. And that's why I think that this effort is also important, is because by being able to bring this type of housing forward and make it available in unincorporated communities, it serves the need of people that are looking for that mother-in-law quarters, that are looking for that accessory apartment, or that are looking for that accessory dwelling unit. Essentially, you know, we can meet all of those needs with this one ordinance and simply just call it an accessory dwelling unit.
Valerie, did you have a further comment?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay.
So quickly, just to wrap up, we're on the home stretch here. So parking, one parking space for the ADU. This is consistent with the parking provisions that are already in the land use ordinance for a multifamily structure or a duplex. You know, it's two parking spaces for the first dwelling unit always, which in this case would be the primary dwelling on the property. And then each additional dwelling unit traditionally requires one additional parking space. So to require one space for the ADU is consistent with how our parking provisions are already administered through our land use planning program. Again, the reiteration, as I've always said, that I previously said about occupancy and rentals, you know, making sure that it's committed to be a long-term rental. So there's that piece in there, which is really important, especially for planners at the counter or on the, to make sure and help the public walk through this to where it's clear this is the intent of this type of housing option. Non-conforming structures, we have a ton of non-conforming structures in our county. Non-conforming means that they exceed maximum building height requirements, they exceed maximum lot coverage requirements, they don't meet setback requirements. But ultimately, you know, these are still dwellings on properties to where if there is an opportunity to allow for an accessory dwelling unit, we don't want to exclude them, just like when we look at, you know, our pre-platted lots that don't meet current minimum zoning size requirements. Is there a way to still allow this type of development on a property? And so this section specifically addresses those types of structures, but the caveat is that they would not be allowed outright on these types of properties with non-conforming structures. There's a special land use review process for non-conforming uses and structures. And then in this section, it may also kick it into a conditional use review process. And I think that that's another piece that will be focus of discussion if this draft starts moving forward through a public review process, because the conditional use review process will add another layer of regulatory review that may or may not be necessary, but just in general, non-conforming uses and structures, if there is an alteration or expansion, they generally have to go through that land use review process anyway. And then we don't want to forget about accessory dwelling units in our commercial zones. So typically, if you have a business on a piece of property, you are allowed to have accessory dwelling units above the first floor, or you can have a caretaker dwelling for the owner of the business on the property as well. This section actually allows for some more flexibility in what that could look like and doesn't limit it just to the owner. It could be the floor area of an ADU or a caretaker apartment, which means that again, as a long-term rental option, could be afforded to more than just the property owner of the business. So that's pretty much that's the draft as it stands. Like I said, we're just looking for that important starting point so that we can start moving it forward. Should the Housing Commission feel this is the right time, I'm happy to go before the board and request a workshop to get that authorization to start a legislative amendment process and start working with unincorporated communities and CACs. And I anticipate the Public Education and Outreach Subcommittee also having a very important role in those efforts as well. So thank you.
There's several comments. I'm not sure who was first, but we'll start out with Chris.
Okay. Yeah, I could see anything. That's great. Okay.
Hey, thanks so much. You know, you mentioned that you and Gail worked on it between 2009, 2011, and the ADU issue. I was wondering how much public resistance you had and whether it would be a good idea to wait until we have our website live and those kind of things, just so we are tracking together and we get the community behind us at the beginning.
The opposition was tremendous.
That's
just
what
to
I
be
thought.
honest. Yeah, the culture of our communities, they just simply were not ready. Even though we knew we had a housing crisis and an issue then, they weren't ready for this, and I don't think our decision makers were competent in supporting this. But I do agree with you in that, you know, collective, collaborative approach moving forward where we can track this in a new way that wasn't available to us before. It'll probably, by the time I get to the board and even get to the point to where I could start actually talking to the CACs and start with any notice with the Planning Commission and anybody else, I'm probably 6 weeks out anyway, maybe 8, just because I've got to take all of these important steps to start. So Chris, we might end up there anyway.
Okay, Gail, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Sarah how much you want this to be gone over by the Development Code Subcommittee or anybody else before it gets presented in maybe a later form of draft to the CAC chairs, so that some of the things that are pretty easy to flag right away are gone or are modified.
So that's why I was thinking this next Tuesday when I have my monthly chair meeting. So I meet monthly with all the CAC chairs and we have great discussions, and it's a way to bridge what's happening with the Housing Commission, with the Planning Commission, the department, etc. I would like their input, just kind of going through the same thing that I've gone through this morning with them, and highlight those points with them that they either really like, that they identify what they think are going to be areas of concern, and see where kind of the temperature is in their opinion for where we could add some more flexibility. Because if it's, the reality is if it's too restrictive, it's not going to be effective. So we have to find that balance of what could be supported, what we know is not going to be supported, but also how do we come up with the best, offer for housing availability in our communities that is responsible and in tune with community character, etc. And so that's really, in looking at that, getting that feedback from the CAC chairs on Tuesday, then what I would like to do is bring that back to the Development Code Subcommittee, and we roll up our sleeves and start talking a little bit more about things that we can refine or clarify, remove or add. And then I think that's where we start. The board going to the workshop for request of authorization to move forward with the legislative amendment process, they're not really going to look at the ordinance at that discussion. Right. That is a discussion of, do you feel it's the right time? Do I have permission to start this process? Understanding that the outcome, there's no guarantee of an outcome. And like I said, the document will continue to evolve and change as it moves through that hearings process. And, the decision makers know that. So it's really just more of, is it the right time? Yes or no? Should we make another run at this? Do I have your, blessing to do this and get it started?
Thank you for the clarification.
Mm-hmm. Hi, Gail, sorry, you skipped over the design section, 5E. And to me, that's the most problematic section.
Okay.
I wanted to ask about that. In point 1 under design, it says the exterior appearance of any construction to create the ADU shall be architecturally consistent with the exterior of the primary dwelling. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering, why the camouflage? We want to encourage ADUs. It seems like this will limit us to constructing buildings that are using archaic designs, since much of our housing is older. Mm-hmm. You're really kind of putting a straitjacket on what such a building could look like. And when I explored some other ADUs in other states, like California has a set of pre-approved ADU designs that people don't even have to apply for. They could just pick one. And they're all very kind of contemporary designs. None of those would fit with pretty much any of the housing here, which would be really too bad, because just one look at them would make people want to live in them right away.
Kristen, that is excellent feedback, and thank you for bringing that up. So one of the things that we've talked about are those design examples as part of the education and outreach component when we talk to community members, so they can visually see how an ADU could fit nicely within their communities, but also some sort of fast track process. And I alluded to that a little bit, even with a tiny home guide, but we could take it, further than that. The design language that you see here was our attempt at reassuring communities that we would be offering a housing option that would blend in with their community characteristics and that would help address those concerns that they have about, having structures in their community that make them feel like all of a sudden there's a higher level of urbanization and density. It's blending. This is our attempt to blend new development with what exists in a way that makes it comfortable for our community residents. But it doesn't have to stay. I mean, and there's, again, this is subcommittee work that can be further refined and massaged and, you know, adding options too.
Like this would be better kept in your pocket as ammunition to make changes if it is demanded.
Mm-hmm.
But like, why put it up front as a limitation? The second point on 5F requires that a standalone detached ADU shall be located behind the front facade foundation of the primary dwelling.
Mm-hmm.
This is also severely limiting.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if it's worth having this in here. It really totally depends on the placement of the original house on the lot. Sometimes way towards the back of the lot. And the only place you could put an ADU would be in front of the facade. So I'm wondering if there are like ways that you can get exceptions to this kind of rule, or maybe just leave out this rule and work with setbacks instead.
That's a great point, and I agree with that. The setback really is the most important component of that. But again, you know, as Gail and I went through the throes of this before, understanding what community needs and desires were, this was one of those attempts to, again, blend and make sure that what we were offering fit the community characteristics of the area. But that's also the great thing about public comment and feedback is we may not need it anymore. You know, that may have changed, but we have tried to be also cognizant of what we know those community desires and concerns are and how we can mitigate those.
Kristen, is your point maybe that that is removed at this point, those two sections, so that we could talk about it more thoroughly before it becomes a point of discussion in the community?
Yeah, I would say leave these until they emerge out of that discussion and then address them.
Okay.
Because you're setting up barriers right from the beginning that may not be necessary.
And as you said earlier, Sarah, this is a draft really that was created quite a while ago.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe it is something to think about it, whether to include that in at this point in time. John, you've been patiently waiting. Do you have a comment?
I do. I kind of agree that we need to make sure it's not a hodgepodge looking structure, you know, like a metal roof with a comp roof main house. I think the aesthetics of that would be appealing to the public. And also wording it in a manner that we don't deal with people assuming that it's for short-term rentals, like the problems we have at the beach on a lot of homes I built. People get very angry that they're having someone new every week at their establishment next door, and to define it that would not be part of this criteria. It is. I know you have a 30-day rental on there, but maybe wording it in a way to the general public that they understand that it is not going to be a weekend rental would be good. But I do think the structure needs to be appealing on the property and the neighborhood. It would make me kind of mad if I had a bunch of square boxes with metal roofs put around my area where I live. I think it should be copacetic with the design, with the types of materials used to match the existing property is my input.
Barbara?
My microphone takes so long to unmute. Sorry. I really like the idea that Kristen presented in other places where they have some pre-approved designs that may address some of these issues. It is important to balance the look, and we have to have flexibility to create the housing. So, Sarah, I really appreciate your understanding of that and your willingness to strike that balance. And I like Kristen's idea that leave the most restrictive things out to begin with, and that can be potentially a future negotiating tool if need be. And So start broadly and be willing to compromise as needed, and stress the importance of the balance of the need for the housing with the need to create a copacetic neighborhood.
Thank you, Barb.
Gail, you had a comment?
Yeah. I want to say, Kristen, thank you so much for the comments and viewpoint. I think that, as I recall, Sarah, when we did this before, we kind of put in a lot of, how do I say it, front-running padding to make sure that we were reassuring the communities. And I hope that times have changed and that more people will frankly be like Kristen and embracing new ideas and not just trying to, I don't want to change my neighborhood at all. I want it to look the same as it's always looked. And I think that as a presentation to the CAC chairs, it really might be best to leave, as has been suggested, to leave those specifics out and wait and see if they are brought up. Before we put them in there as bait. Because that's what they'll be. One other comment too is, I wonder if on the first page under 1C, if it could say increase and diversify long-term rental housing. Then it's right up front on the first page of the ordinance that this is long-term rental, because we don't need to, we got plenty of rental housing.
Right.
No, I would add to that under 1D, as long as we're talking about some specifics here. I would take out the word "and guest." Provide for general convenience to area property owners to accommodate family and guests with independent living quarters. And guests implies to me short-term
rentals. Yep.
Okay.
Thank you.
Jeff, get you into the conversation.
Hi, thanks. Is there a way, and maybe this isn't a problem, but I'm kind of concerned that second homeowners may build this for the owners to have a place to stay and keep the main house as a rental. So I'd like to see a mechanism where this is only, the only people eligible might be county residents.
So Jeff, that's a great comment. I will tell you there is language in here, and I apologize because I did skip over it very briefly. If there's an ADU on a property, neither residence can be rented as a short-term rental.
Oh, that's great. Thank you, Sarah.
Yep, you bet. It commits them both. Then that way, again, that's about protecting that housing stock.
That's wonderful. Thanks for taking care of that.
Yeah, you bet.
Kristen, you had an additional comment.
No, I think my hand is still up. I don't know how to do it. Okay, sorry.
John, is your hand still up as well? Okay. All right. And Jeff, any other comments that Sarah would benefit from? Now, we'll have our meeting Monday, correct? And so we may have a chance to do some last minute talking about this before you would go to the CAC chairs.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I really appreciate all of the feedback today. Thank you all so much. This is so helpful. And, I think, what I'm hearing is accessibility and flexibility, but finding that right layer of balance with everything so that we are also, being careful with our communities. And we certainly want that. And I think, with your feedback and then the feedback from the chairs, I think we can come up with something quite nicely that hopefully will be something that people can accept and be able to use. That's the big piece. We want it to be accessible and a program that's, able to be used in our communities.
So Sarah, would it be beneficial for the Housing Commission to take some formal action at this point to suggest to the Board of Commissioners that this issue should be reviewed?
Sure. We can start working on the finer points of, that draft. And if the Housing Commission feels it's the right time and would like me to go before the board and request that authorization to start the process, then I'm happy to do that.
Let's see. We haven't done a motion before. I don't think, maybe we did, it's all been by consensus, but since we're not in the room and it's not that easy to do that, could I have a motion for the board in a second to move this ADU concept forward in the process of review? Gail, could you make a motion?
Yeah, had to find my microphone. Sorry. Yeah, I move that the Tillamook County Housing Commission authorize Sarah to go before the Board of County Commissioners to begin looking at the accessory dwelling unit ordinance and bring it forward in its process. Will that do it, Sarah?
Works for me.
How about a second?
I second. Tom Jared.
All right. Okay, our vote will be by raising your hand. I think that's the best way to do it. All in favor, raise your hand. All right, opposed? Okay, I think we got it. So Sarah, you are approved to move forward here. I'll remove my hand.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
I just have one more quick comment. Sarah, as a member of the Outreach Committee, I'm looking forward to working with you when it gets to that stage of presenting to the public.
Thank you so much, Barb. And I think that this is great timing, having a housing coordinator come on board, because the two of us can work together to work with the Public Education and Outreach Committee. I can work with the decision makers, and we'll be on our way.
Okay. Sounds good. Apologies for my hand. I haven't figured out how to remove it, so please ignore it. The next item on the agenda probably is something that we'll want to delay at some point. I put together this list in the thought that we have a work plan that was adopted some time ago when Jake was still aboard. Sarah has worked hard on keeping us going, but it probably was not realistic given that we didn't have staff to work full-time on it. So I divided kind of what we were doing into short-term, meaning things that could benefit our housing crisis more immediately, and then longer-term, meaning probably 2 years. If we do a zone change, for example, by the time it all processes through and a house is built or an apartment building is built, we're at least 2 years out. And then I also divided it into things that we could do without any money and things that we could do if we had resources to support them. I don't think we should really spend much time on it today because we will have our new staff person in. That person will be the implementer of many of these things and probably needs to be on board before we say this is exactly what we want to do, to get that person's feedback on priorities. But I think it's a pretty comprehensive list of everything we've talked about, and I think it's important for us to decide what do we want to spend most time on at this particular point in time, so that we aren't just spread too thin, and we might form some additional committees or our own resources to address some of those. So I guess I'm interested in any comments, but this was kind of a, there's a second page to that, Sarah, that's you might show too. That's the one that if we had resources, what we would do. So I don't know, any comments at this point? I guess I would just ask that you spend some time and look at it and see what you think. And then when we have our staff person on board, this would be one of the probably initial things we talk about to make sure we're focusing our resources on things that we think we can accomplish to date. Barbara, you had something?
I appreciate this, putting this list together, Ed. I think it is pretty comprehensive. And one thing, it's a kind of small thing, and maybe it doesn't belong as its own item on the list, but I still like the idea that has been brought up about providing some kind of incentive to landlords who are able to rent long-term. Instead of punishing people who are renting short-term, can we incentivize people willing to rent long-term. And I don't know where that belongs.
Good. Excellent. Gail.
Yeah, a little bit segueing into this, an idea that's come up in the outreach committee is to have some sort of a thermometer that says how many housing units we need and how many we've built, and maybe some rough gauge of what kind of houses that they are. So we have some graphic for the public of what and how we're doing it, and also for ourselves, so we don't think we're coming to all these meetings and what's happening. It would be really nice to have some way to easily and quantitatively measure our progress. So if anybody has any numbers that would help us on that, that would be great.
You know, back to Barbara's comment, yesterday we talked a little bit about the ADU, and there's an issue of reassessment of properties once an ADU happens. And I think the city of Portland has dealt with it where you aren't reassessed 100% because that's a deterrent. And along with the issue of landlords, maybe getting some incentive, then as we talk about the property tax issues on ADUs, we could throw that in as well about the reassessment issue. Any others?
This is Michelle. I just want to piggyback on what Gail said, that I think it's super helpful, and I can speak, I guess I think that to emphasize the need for this for grant writing purposes, we have to have specific targets that we've set with specific timelines, and then we need to be able to demonstrate our capacity for meeting those targets and timelines, or the progress toward that. So I do think there needs to be some sort of a formal process where we say, okay, based on the original study, this is what we said we needed, what's realistic given the current trajectory of development. And it doesn't, I think that we can say our target is to have 50 ADUs built in the next 18 months or whatever it might be, and then we chip away at that, and if we come in at 3 ADUs, then we reevaluate our strategies or our reality or whatever it is. But I think that would really help us in our work and in our fundraising.
I know Gail had mentioned to me earlier the advantage of trying to attach metrics to all of these potential efforts that we're doing, and I think that's an excellent point, Michelle. Okay, any others? Okay, our last item, if Commissioner Scar is aboard, is to get any kind of update that she might have.
So I am here. I don't know that I have any relevant updates for you all. It feels like as a board, we've been just busily dealing with issues related to COVID and the business of the county. So in terms of housing, I don't know that I have a whole lot to offer other than what I shared in the mission moment. So if there are questions, I'm happy to answer.
Any updates on any of the federal funding coming into the county?
Not at this time. We continue in our process to design our outreach process in order to invite applications. So hopefully we'll have that sometime in the next couple of months. But with the current surge in COVID cases, I think it's caused us to take just a little bit of a pause to make sure that our process is inclusive of impacts that we had hoped were in the rearview mirror that are no longer in the rearview mirror. So, it will come. It's just probably going to take a little longer.
I think we'll be ready to suggest any housing-related issues that may fall within the guidelines of funding. Okay. I think we're at public comment. Is there anybody that hasn't had an opportunity to comment and is interested in something? I guess we answered all the questions. Okay.
I did notice that Trevor Belts was with us and that he indicated he was on the legislative committee. I didn't know if in Carrie's absence there was anything there that he might want to highlight for us.
Thank you for that opportunity, Commissioner. We have not, since the last Housing Commission subcommittee met, or actually since the last Housing Commission. So unfortunately, I don't have an update. I think I can resend during the last meeting, maybe it's in the minutes, but that Carrie had laid out some timelines for the legislative opportunities to submit bills and identify possible policies that the Housing Commission would want to track or want to, find a way to advocate for. And so I can resend those. But I think the question to the Housing Commission is if there's any, other things identified that we would want to be proactive on to support or seek work on through the Association of Oregon Counties or on your own.
Excellent. I think if you did resend that, and we will definitely have that on the agenda for our next meeting. Thank you. Okay, anything else? We're early. We're 15 minutes almost early. So you could all take a coffee break and relax before you go back to work. Okay, well, thank you. We'll adjourn at 10:43. Thank you.